The October wind cut through the cypress trees lining the private cemetery with a sharpness that matched the ache in Matteo De Luca's chest. Every Thursday morning, without fail, he made the drive from his penthouse in Manhattan to this secluded hillside in northern New Jersey, where the only grave that mattered to him lay beneath a small white marble headstone. The cemetery wasn't listed on any map. It belonged to old families, the kind whose names were whispered rather than spoken aloud, whose business dealings happened in basement rooms, and whose loyalties were sealed with blood rather than signatures. Matteo's polished black Oxford shoes crunched against the gravel path as he approached the grave, a bouquet of white roses in his hand, the same kind he brought every week. At 32 years old, he commanded respect from men twice his age. His dark hair was swept back in a perfect slicked-back style, every strand in place despite the wind. The top 2 buttons of his custom-tailored navy shirt were undone, revealing the edge of an intricate design inked across his collarbone. A crowned lion holding a broken sword, a symbol of power maintained through loss. His Patek Philippe gleamed on his wrist, catching the pale morning light, and a thin gold chain rested against his throat. Everything about Matteo De Luca spoke of control, wealth, and danger. But here, in front of this small grave, he was just a father who had failed to protect his daughter. He was 10 feet away when he saw her. A woman knelt before his daughter's headstone, her shoulders trembling. Her head bowed so low that her long chestnut hair fell forward like a curtain. She wore simple jeans and a cream sweater, both slightly too large for her slender frame. Her hands were pressed together as if in prayer, but they shook with the kind of tremor that came from deep, unrelenting grief. A single white lily lay on the ground beside her, its petals already browning at the edges. Matteo stopped. His jaw tightened. Anger flared hot and immediate in his chest. Who was this woman? Why was she here, at his daughter's grave, in his private sanctuary of mourning? He took a step forward, his presence casting a shadow over her. But before he could speak, she whispered something so quietly, he almost didn't hear it. She tried to breathe when I held her. The world seemed to tilt. Matteo's heart stuttered, his breath catching in his throat. Those words, they struck him like a blade between the ribs. He stared down at the woman, his mind racing back to that night 6 months ago, the night his world had shattered into pieces he could never reassemble. The hospital, the sterile white lights, the beeping machines, the doctor's grave expression, and in the chaos of it all, a figure in pale blue scrubs, her face streaked with tears as she cradled a tiny, impossibly fragile body. This woman. You, he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding beneath a tire. You were there. She flinched at the sound of his voice but didn't turn around. Her shoulders drew inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, to disappear. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be here. I couldn't stay away. Matteo's fists clenched at his sides, the roses crumpling slightly in his grip. He should have been furious. He should have demanded answers, should have used the cold authority he wielded like a weapon to make her explain why she dared to come here, to his daughter's resting place. But instead, he found himself frozen, staring at the back of her head, at the way her whole body seemed to be collapsing under the weight of something unbearable. What's your name? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost careful. She hesitated, then slowly lifted her head. When she turned to look at him, Matteo felt something shift inside his chest. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, with dark circles beneath eyes that were an arresting shade of hazel, green and gold and brown all at once, like autumn leaves reflected in water. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty marred by exhaustion and sorrow. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. Elena, she said softly. Elena Brooks. I was the neonatal nurse on duty that night. Mateo's throat tightened. He remembered now, more clearly. She had been the one who stayed with his daughter when the monitor started screaming, who had held her when the doctors stepped back with resignation in their eyes. She had been the last person to touch his baby girl before she died. "Why are you here?" he asked, though his voice had lost its edge. Elena's eyes filled with tears that spilled over immediately, trailing down her cheeks. "Because I can't forget," she whispered. "I can't forget the sound she made, the way she looked at me, like she was trying so hard to stay. I've been coming here every week since the funeral. I didn't think anyone would." She broke off, covering her mouth with her hand as a sob escaped her. Mateo stood there, towering over her, this woman who was falling apart in front of him. He should have felt satisfaction at her suffering. He should have wanted to see her punished, blamed, destroyed for being part of the night that took everything from him. But instead, all he felt was a strange, painful recognition. She was drowning in the same grief that had been pulling him under for months. Slowly, carefully, he knelt down beside her. The movement was awkward for a man like him. He wasn't accustomed to making himself vulnerable, to lowering himself to anyone's level. But something about this moment demanded it. He placed the roses gently against the headstone, beside her wilted lily. "She did try to breathe," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept locked away. "I saw it too. Just once. Like she was fighting." Elena turned to look at him, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "She was so strong," she whispered. "So small, but so strong." They knelt there together in silence, two broken people united by a tiny life that had lasted less than an hour. The wind moved through the trees above them, carrying the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter. Around them, the cemetery was empty, the other graves silent witnesses to their shared grief. Mateo studied Elena's profile, the delicate line of her jaw, the way she bit her lower lip to keep from crying harder, the tension in her shoulders. She was young, probably mid-20s, with an innocence that seemed out of place in his world. She was everything he wasn't. Soft where he was hard, vulnerable where he was guarded, compassionate where he was ruthless. "How often do you come here?" he asked. "Every Tuesday and Friday morning," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before my shift starts. I hoped it would help, that I could find some kind of peace. But it doesn't get easier." "No," Mateo agreed, his gaze fixed on the small headstone. "It doesn't." They stayed there for what might have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose meaning in that place. Eventually, Elena stood, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Mateo rose as well, his tall frame making her seem even smaller beside him. "I should go," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I didn't mean to intrude on your time with her." "Wait," Mateo said, surprising himself. Elena paused, looking up at him with those haunting hazel eyes. He didn't know what he wanted to say, only that he wasn't ready for her to leave. "What time do you usually come on Fridays?" Elena blinked, confusion crossing her features. "Around 7:30. "Why?" Mateo's jaw worked as he considered his next words. He was a man who calculated every move, every decision, with cold precision. But this was something different. Something he couldn't quite explain even to himself. "I come on Thursdays," he said. "But maybe I'll start coming on Fridays too." Understanding dawned slowly in Elena's eyes, followed by something that looked like relief mixed with apprehension. She nodded slowly, then turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller as she made her way down the path toward the parking area. Mateo stood there long after she disappeared from view, staring at the 2 flowers resting against his daughter's grave, his pristine white roses and her dying lily side by side. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something other than rage and emptiness. He felt a connection to someone who understood, someone who carried the same impossible weight. As he finally turned to leave, he made a decision that would change everything. He would come back on Friday, and the Friday after that. Not just to mourn his daughter, but to understand the woman who mourned her too. The woman who had been there at the end, who had held his baby girl and whispered comfort in her final moments. Friday came with rain, a cold, persistent drizzle that turned the cemetery paths muddy and made the air smell of wet earth and decay. Mateo arrived at 7:15, earlier than he'd said, though he couldn't articulate why even to himself. He sat in his black Mercedes AMG, watching the entrance through rain-streaked windows, feeling ridiculous and exposed in a way he hadn't felt since he was a teenager trying to impress his first girlfriend. At exactly 7:30, Elena's old Toyota pulled through the gates. She parked 3 spaces away from him, and when she stepped out, Mateo noticed she was wearing the same cream sweater, but had added a thin jacket that did little to protect her from the rain. She carried a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in brown paper. She saw his car immediately. There was no missing the sleek black vehicle among the modest sedans in the lot, and for a moment, she froze. Mateo got out, his long coat repelling the rain effortlessly, and walked toward her. Up close, he could see that she looked even more exhausted than before, with new shadows under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth that spoke of sleepless nights. "You came," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the sound of rain hitting leaves. "I said I would." Mateo's tone was matter of fact, but something in his dark eyes was gentler than his usual predatory stare. They walked together to the grave, neither speaking, their footsteps falling into an unconscious rhythm. The headstone was darker when wet, the carved letters deeper and more pronounced. Mateo noticed that someone, Elena presumably, had cleaned away the fallen leaves that had accumulated around the base. Elena knelt and placed her daisies beside the roses that were still fresh from Mateo's Thursday visit. She touched the cold marble gently, her fingers tracing the engraved name, Isabella Rose de Luca. "I talk to her sometimes," Elena admitted quietly, glancing up at Mateo, who stood beside her like a dark sentinel. "Is that strange?" "No." Mateo's response was immediate. "I do too." Elena smiled slightly, the first smile he'd seen from her, though it was sad and fleeting. "What do you tell her?" Mateo was quiet for a long moment, rain dripping from his perfectly styled hair, darkening his shirt collar. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I tell her about her mother, about how beautiful she was, how much she wanted Isabella, how she died trying to bring her into this world." He paused, his jaw clenching. "I tell her I'm sorry, that I should have protected them both better." Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back. "It wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" Mateo's voice turned sharp, bitter. "I chose that life. I brought her mother into my world. A world where people have enemies, where being associated with my name makes you a target. The stress alone." He cut himself off, his fists clenching. "The medical complications had nothing to do with stress or external factors," Elena said firmly, standing up to face him. Even in her grief, there was a professional certainty in her voice. "I read the file. Your wife had placental abruption. It's sudden, unpredictable, and no one could have prevented it. Not you, not the doctors, not anyone." Mateo stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his features. He wasn't accustomed to being contradicted, especially not with such gentle conviction. "You read the file?" Elena's cheeks flushed slightly. "I've read it dozens of times. trying to understand if there was anything I could have done differently, any sign I missed, any procedure I should have pushed for. But there wasn't. Isabella was born too early, too compromised. She fought so hard, but her voice broke. But sometimes fighting isn't enough. You blame yourself, Matteo said, and it wasn't a question. Every day. Elena's admission was raw, honest. I keep replaying those 18 minutes she was alive, wondering if I had tilted her differently, if I had cleared her airways faster, if I had... Stop. Matteo's voice was commanding, and Elena fell silent immediately, her eyes widening slightly. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You gave her comfort in her last moments. You held her when I couldn't get there in time. You made sure she wasn't alone. His voice dropped lower, almost tender. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something I can never repay. Elena's breath caught. Standing this close to him, she could see the fine details of his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark eyes held depths of pain that matched her own. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody with notes of cedar and bergamot. Despite everything, despite the rain, despite the grief, despite the strangeness of this entire situation, she felt something shift between them, some invisible barrier beginning to dissolve. I don't want repayment, she whispered. I just want to stop feeling like I failed her. Then we're the same. Matteo's hand moved, almost of its own accord, to brush a strand of wet hair from her face. The gesture was surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands were rumored to have dealt death without hesitation. We're both punishing ourselves for something we couldn't control. They stood there in the rain, two people who should never have met, connected by the briefest life that had somehow changed them both forever. After a long moment, Matteo stepped back, breaking the strange intimacy of the moment. Have you eaten? He asked abruptly. Elena blinked, caught off guard by the shift. What? Breakfast. Have you eaten? Matteo's tone was matter-of-fact, almost businesslike. There's a diner about 3 miles from here. Not fancy, but the coffee's decent. I don't think... Elena started, but Matteo was already walking toward the parking lot. I'm going there now, he called over his shoulder. You can follow if you want. Or not. Your choice. Elena stood there, torn between the sensible part of her brain that screamed this was a bad idea, and the lonely, grief-stricken part that desperately wanted to talk to someone who understood. In the end, grief won. She followed. The diner was exactly as Matteo described. A small, somewhat shabby establishment with vinyl booths and laminate tables. The few patrons present at this early hour barely glanced up when they entered, though Matteo's presence alone commanded attention. He looked absurdly out of place among the truck drivers and night shift workers, his expensive clothes and bearing marking him as someone from an entirely different world. They sat in a booth near the back, and a tired-looking waitress brought coffee without being asked. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to do with her nervous energy. Tell me about yourself, Matteo said, his dark eyes studying her across the table. Beyond the hospital, beyond Isabella, who is Elena Brooks? Elena hesitated, uncertain how to answer. There's not much to tell. I grew up in Pennsylvania, small town outside Pittsburgh. Went to nursing school in Philadelphia. Moved to New Jersey 3 years ago for the job at St. Catherine's. She paused, stirring sugar into her coffee even though she took it black. I live alone. I don't have family nearby. Work was, my whole life. Was? Matteo caught the word immediately. Elena's hands tightened around her mug. I'm on administrative leave. There's an investigation. Matteo's entire demeanor changed, his body going still in a way that reminded Elena of a predator sensing prey. What kind of investigation? The hospital administration is reviewing all neonatal deaths from the past year, Elena explained, her voice barely above a whisper. They're looking for patterns, for someone to blame. My supervisor suggested I might have... She couldn't finish the sentence, her throat closing up. They're trying to blame you for Isabella's death. Mateo's voice was flat, dangerous. And 3 others, Elena admitted miserably. Babies I tried to save. Babies who died despite everything we did. They're questioning my judgment, my competence, my procedures. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I dedicated my life to helping these babies, and now they're acting like I'm some kind of... It's a cover-up, Mateo interrupted, his mind already working through the implications. They're looking for a scapegoat to protect themselves from lawsuits. Find one nurse to blame, make it look like individual error rather than systemic failure. Elena stared at him. How do you know that? A cold smile touched Mateo's lips. Because that's what I would do if I needed to protect my interests. Make someone disposable take the fall. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Give me names. Your supervisor, the hospital administrator, anyone involved in this investigation. Why? Elena asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Because no one who cared for my daughter the way you did deserves to be destroyed by bureaucratic cowards covering their own asses. Mateo's voice was hard, final. Give me the names, Elena. She should have refused. She should have recognized the danger in accepting help from a man like Matteo De Luca, whose reputation preceded him even if she didn't know the details. But desperation and exhaustion made people do things they wouldn't normally consider. Dr. Harrison Blackwell, she said quietly. He's the chief of staff. And Margaret Chen, the hospital's legal counsel. They're leading the investigation. Matteo pulled out his phone and made a note, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Anyone else? My supervisor, Sarah Mitchell. But I don't think she's complicit if she suggested you're at fault, Matteo said coldly. Anyone who goes along with it is part of the problem. He put his phone away and fixed Elena with a look that was both protective and possessive. This ends now. By Monday, the investigation will be dropped, your record will be cleared, and those people will understand that Elena Brooks is not someone they can use as a scapegoat. You can't just... Elena started, but Matteo's expression stopped her. Yes, I can, he said simply. And I will. They sat in silence for a while, Elena processing what had just happened while Matteo made several brief phone calls in a low voice she couldn't quite hear. When he finally put his phone away again, he looked at her with something that might have been concern. You need to sleep, he observed. When's the last time you got a full night's rest? Elena laughed bitterly. I don't remember. Tonight, Matteo said decisively. Tonight, you're going to sleep. I can't just... I'm not asking. Matteo's tone brooked no argument. I'm having my personal physician send over something to help you sleep. No arguments. Elena wanted to protest, wanted to assert her independence, but she was too tired to fight. And truthfully, the idea of one night without the nightmares, without lying awake staring at the ceiling and hearing Isabella's final breath, it was too tempting to refuse. Okay, she whispered. Matteo nodded, satisfied. As they prepared to leave, he placed several bills on the table, far more than the coffee cost, and walked Elena to her car. The rain had stopped, leaving everything glistening and fresh. In the parking lot, standing between their 2 very different vehicles, Elena looked up at him. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't even know me. Matteo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Because you were there when I couldn't be, he finally said. Because you cared enough to come to her grave week after week, even though it cost you peace. Because in the 6 months since Isabella died, You're the first person I've met who hurts as much as I do." He paused. "And because something tells me that if I let you disappear now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Elena's breath caught. Before she could respond, Matteo turned and walked to his Mercedes, leaving her standing there with her heart racing and her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. As she drove home, Elena realized that everything had just changed. She had accepted help from a dangerous man, had shared coffee with someone whose world was completely foreign to her, had felt a connection that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. True to his word, Matteo's personal physician appeared at Elena's modest apartment that evening, a distinguished older man with a kind face who asked gentle questions about her sleep patterns, her stress levels, her general health. He left her with a prescription for medication that would help her rest without the heavy sedation that left people groggy and disconnected. "Mr. DeLuca was very specific about your care," the doctor said as he prepared to leave. "He wants me to check on you again in 3 days. If you need anything at all before then, call this number." He handed her a card with a direct line. Elena stared at the card long after the doctor left, unsettled by the level of care Matteo had arranged within hours of their conversation. She wasn't accustomed to being taken care of, to having someone notice her suffering and immediately act to alleviate it. It felt overwhelming and comforting at the same time. That night, she slept for 10 hours straight, the first dreamless sleep she'd had in half a year. She woke feeling almost human again, though guilt immediately crept in. What right did she have to rest peacefully when Isabella never would? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope you slept. Coffee tomorrow morning? Same place. M?" Elena stared at the message for a long time before responding. "How did you get my number?" The reply came immediately. "I have resources. Is that a yes?" Despite her better judgment, Elena typed, "Yes." Over the next 2 weeks, their morning meetings became routine. Every Tuesday and Friday, they would meet at Isabella's grave first, then move to the diner for coffee and conversation. Slowly, carefully, they began to learn each other beyond their shared grief. Matteo told her about his childhood, growing up in a world where loyalty was everything and betrayal meant death, where he learned to read people's intentions before he learned to read books. He spoke of his late wife, Sophia, with a reverence that made Elena's heart ache. They'd met when she was a translator at an art gallery, completely unaware of who he was, treating him like any other customer interested in classical paintings. She'd made him work for her attention, had challenged him in ways no one else dared, had seen past the dangerous exterior to the man underneath. "She made me want to be better," Matteo said quietly one morning, his coffee growing cold between his hands. "Not different. She never asked me to change who I was, but better at being who I was, more thoughtful, more careful with the power I wielded." His jaw tightened. "I failed her in that. I couldn't protect her from the one thing that mattered most." Elena shared her own stories, growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school, who died of cancer 2 years after Elena graduated. She talked about her calling to neonatal nursing, how holding those tiny lives in her hands felt like the most important thing she could possibly do with her existence. "I thought I was strong enough," she admitted during one of their conversations. "I thought I could handle the losses, that I could separate professional from personal. But Isabella..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "She broke something in me." "Maybe that something needed to be broken," Matteo suggested, his gaze intense. "Maybe we're not supposed to go through life untouched by the people we lose. Maybe being broken is proof that they mattered." Their connection deepened with each meeting, evolving from shared grief into something more complex. Matteo found himself thinking about Elena at odd moments throughout his days, wondering what she was doing, whether she'd eaten, if she was sleeping better. He caught himself smiling at things she'd said, replaying conversations in his mind. Elena, for her part, began to see past the dangerous exterior that Matteo presented to the world. She saw the man who brought fresh flowers every week without fail, who remembered every detail she shared about her mother, who listened when she talked about the babies she'd saved with the same intensity he brought to his own business dealings. She saw someone who understood loss in a way most people never would, who didn't try to minimize her pain or rush her healing. But she also saw the danger. The way people in the diner sometimes noticed Matteo and quickly looked away, fear flickering across their faces. The expensive cars that occasionally followed at a distance when she drove home. The phone calls he would take in Italian, his voice dropping to a lethal softness that made her shiver. One morning, 3 weeks after their first meeting, Elena arrived at the cemetery to find not just Matteo waiting, but 2 other men standing near expensive black SUVs. They were clearly his security, though they maintained a respectful distance. Matteo's expression was darker than usual, tension evident in his shoulders. "What's wrong?" Elena asked immediately, alarm rising in her chest. "The hospital investigation," Matteo said tersely. "It should have been resolved by now, but someone's pushing back. They're being more stubborn than I anticipated." "What did you do?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Nothing illegal," Matteo assured her, catching her worried expression. "I had my lawyers file complaints about the hospital's procedures, had several former patients come forward with concerns about administrative oversight. I made it clear that if they continued targeting you, they'd face scrutiny they couldn't afford." His jaw clenched. "But someone in that hospital has powerful connections. They're not backing down as easily as they should." Elena's stomach twisted. "Matteo, you shouldn't be doing this. I can handle it myself." "No, you can't," Matteo said flatly. "They're systematically destroying your career, your reputation, your peace of mind. They're doing it to protect themselves, and they'll sacrifice you without a second thought unless someone stops them." "But what if you get in trouble?" Elena's voice rose slightly. "What if this comes back on you?" Something shifted in Matteo's expression, a softness that seemed out of place on his hard features. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body despite the cool morning air. "Elena," he said quietly, "do you understand that I would burn that entire hospital to the ground if it meant protecting you?" Her breath caught, the intensity in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Matteo replied. "I know you're the only person who understands what I've lost. I know you cared for my daughter when she needed it most. I know you've been punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault, just like I have. And I know—" He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "I know that when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "But Matteo, your world, it's so different from mine. I don't know if I can—" "I'm not asking you to join my world," Matteo interrupted gently. "I'm just asking you to let me be part of yours. Let me help you. Let me care about you. Let me—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since she'd met him. "Let me have something good in my life again." Before Elena could respond, one of Matteo's security detail approached, speaking rapidly in Italian. Matteo's expression hardened immediately, his entire demeanor shifting from vulnerable to dangerous in a heartbeat. "I have to go," he said to Elena, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Something's come up that I need to handle personally." "Is everything okay?" Elena asked, worry evident in her voice. "It will be." Matteo's response was grim. He turned back to her, and for a moment, his hand lifted as if he wanted to touch her face, but he stopped himself. "I'll call you later. Stay home today, okay? Don't go anywhere alone." The command in his voice should have annoyed her, but instead, Elena felt a strange flutter of concern. "You're scaring me." "I'm keeping you safe," Matteo corrected. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her features, then turned and strode toward his Mercedes. Within seconds, he and his security detail were gone, leaving Elena standing alone in the cemetery. That night, Elena's phone remained silent. No call from Matteo, no text, nothing. She tried his number twice and got voicemail both times. By midnight, worry had transformed into full-blown anxiety. She knew almost nothing about his life beyond their morning meetings, had no way to know if he was safe, no one to call to check on him. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she paced her small apartment, jumping at every sound, checking her phone obsessively. News websites yielded nothing helpful. No reports of violence or arrests that might involve him. She was left in a terrible limbo, realizing how deeply she'd come to care about this dangerous man who had entered her life through tragedy. The next morning, Friday, their regular meeting day, Elena drove to the cemetery despite her exhaustion. She needed to be there, needed to maintain their routine even if he wasn't going to show. As she pulled into the parking lot at 7:30, her heart sank when she didn't see his Mercedes. She walked to Isabella's grave alone, placed her flowers with trembling hands, and whispered a prayer for Matteo's safety, along with her usual words for the baby girl who'd brought them together. The October morning was cold, frost beginning to form on the grass, and Elena wrapped her thin jacket tighter around herself as she knelt there. She'd been there for perhaps 15 minutes when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, hope surging in her chest. But it wasn't Matteo. It was a man she'd never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit that marked him as someone from Matteo's world. His face was hard, professional, revealing nothing. "Miss Brooks?" he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Anthony Russo, head of security for the DeLuca family. Mr. DeLuca asked me to come find you." Elena stood quickly, her heart racing. "Is he okay? Where is he?" "He's fine," Anthony assured her, though his expression remained serious. "But there's a situation that requires his immediate attention out of state. He'll be gone for at least a week, possibly longer. He wanted me to tell you personally, and to ensure you understand that the security measures he put in place for you remain active during his absence." "Security measures?" Elena's voice rose slightly. "What security measures?" Anthony's expression flickered with something that might have been amusement. "You didn't think you've been driving around alone these past few weeks, did you? Mr. DeLuca has had a security detail on you since the day you first met." Elena felt her face flush with a mixture of emotions, anger at not being told, confusion about why she needed protection, and underneath it all, a strange warmth at knowing Matteo had been watching over her without her knowledge. "He's very concerned about your safety," Anthony continued. "Given the situation with the hospital investigation and certain parties who might wish to pressure you or harm you to send a message to him, my team will maintain surveillance until he returns and determines it's safe to reduce protection." "I don't need protection," Elena protested weakly, though even she didn't sound convinced. Anthony's expression softened slightly. "With respect, Miss Brooks, you became part of Mr. DeLuca's life the moment you showed up at that grave. In our world, that means you're under his protection whether you want to be or not. It's not negotiable." Elena didn't know how to respond to that. Anthony pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "My direct number," he said. "If you need anything, or if you feel unsafe for any reason, you call immediately. Day or night, it doesn't matter. Mr. DeLuca was very clear about your importance." After Anthony left, Elena sat down heavily on a nearby bench, trying to process everything. Her life had become something she didn't recognize, filled with security details and dangerous men, and a level of care from someone she'd known for less than a month that felt both overwhelming and necessary. She missed him. The realization hit her with surprising force. She missed Matteo's presence, his dark eyes that saw too much, his rough voice that somehow always knew what to say. She missed feeling less alone in her grief, missed the morning ritual that had become the anchor of her days. As she drove home, Elena realized that she'd crossed some invisible line without meaning to. She'd let Matteo De Luca become important to her, had allowed herself to depend on his strength, had started to imagine a future that included him in ways that went beyond shared mourning. And now, with him gone and security watching her every move, she was left to wonder what exactly she'd gotten herself into, and whether she had the courage to see it through. The week stretched into 2, then 3. Elena returned to work after the hospital investigation was abruptly dropped, just as Matteo had promised, with a formal apology from administration and a notation in her file clearing her of any wrongdoing. Her supervisor, Sarah Mitchell, avoided eye contact during their first interaction back, and Elena learned through hospital gossip that both Dr. Blackwell and Margaret Chen had quietly resigned for personal reasons. Elena should have felt relieved, vindicated even. Instead, she felt hollow. Working the neonatal unit again brought back memories of Isabella's final moments with crystalline clarity. But now those memories were intertwined with thoughts of Matteo. His hands gentle despite their capacity for violence. His voice soft when he spoke about his daughter. The way he looked at Elena, like she was something precious that needed protecting. She maintained her routine of visiting Isabella's grave every Tuesday and Friday morning, but the cemetery felt empty without Matteo's presence. Anthony Russo's security team remained invisible but constant. She'd catch glimpses of the same dark sedan in her rearview mirror, noticed the same faces in the hospital cafeteria at odd hours. It should have felt invasive, but instead, it made her feel strangely safe, connected to Matteo, even in his absence. Her phone would occasionally buzz with text messages from unknown numbers that she knew were from him. "How was your shift? Are you sleeping? Sorry, I can't call. Soon." The messages were brief, almost impersonal, but Elena read them dozens of times, searching for hidden meaning in the sparse words. On the 23rd day after Matteo's departure, Elena was working a particularly difficult shift. A premature baby girl, 30 weeks, barely 3 pounds, was struggling despite their best efforts. Elena spent hours at the incubator, monitoring vitals, adjusting the ventilator, willing this tiny life to keep fighting. The parents were young, terrified, holding hands in the corner while Elena and the other nurses fought to save their daughter. At 3 a.m, the baby's vitals stabilized. Elena finally allowed herself to breathe as the monitor showed steady heartbeats, strong oxygen levels. The mother burst into tears of relief, and even Elena felt moisture in her own eyes as she stepped back and let the parents approach the incubator. "You saved her," the father whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our baby girl." Elena wanted to correct him, to explain that it was a team effort, that these outcomes were never guaranteed, that luck played as much a role as skill. But instead, she just nodded and excused herself to the break room where she could finally let herself cry. Tears of relief, exhaustion, and a grief that had never really left her. She was sitting with her head in her hands when her phone rang. An unknown number, but by now she knew what that meant. She answered immediately. "Elena." Matteo's voice was rough, tired, but hearing it after 3 weeks of silence made her heart clench. "Matteo," she breathed. "Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine, and I'm coming home." There was a pause, and she could hear voices in the background, the sound of movement. "Tomorrow night. Can you meet me at the cemetery Saturday morning, our usual time?" "Yes," Elena said immediately. "Of course. But Matteo, what happened? Why did you have to leave so suddenly?" "Family business," Matteo said, his tone making it clear he couldn't elaborate. "Problems that needed to be handled personally. It's resolved now." Another pause. "I missed you." The simple admission hit Elena harder than any of his grand gestures had. "I missed you too," she whispered, Anthony tells me the investigation was dropped, that you're back at work. Yes. Thank you for whatever you did. You don't need to thank me, Elena. You never need to thank me for protecting what's important to me. His voice softened. How are you really? Tell me the truth. Elena closed her eyes, leaning back in the uncomfortable break room chair. Tired, scared sometimes, confused about what's happening between us. She paused. But I'm okay. Better than I was before we started meeting. Good. Mateo's satisfaction was evident even through the phone. That's good. I have to go now, but I'll see you Saturday, 7:30. I'll be there, Elena promised. After they hung up, Elena sat in the break room for a long time, trying to understand what she was feeling. Relief that he was safe. Anticipation at seeing him again. Fear about where this relationship was heading. And underneath it all, a growing certainty that whatever was happening between them had moved far beyond shared grief into something she couldn't quite name, but desperately wanted to explore. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear, with frost turning the cemetery grass silver in the early light. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, too anxious to wait any longer. She placed her usual flowers by Isabella's headstone, then stood back, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. At exactly 7:30, she heard the familiar sound of Mateo's Mercedes pulling into the parking lot. Her heart began to race as she watched him approach, and even from a distance, she could see he looked different. Harder somehow, more dangerous, as if the 3 weeks away had stripped away some of the gentleness he'd shown her and revealed more of the man underneath. He was wearing all black, tailored pants and a fitted shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the artwork that decorated his forearms. His hair was perfectly styled as always, but there was a new tension in his jaw, a sharpness to his gaze that made Elena's breath catch. When he reached her, they stood facing each other for a long moment, neither speaking. Up close, Elena could see new shadows under his eyes, a small healing cut above his eyebrow that hadn't been there before. His cologne was the same, cedar and bergamot, but underneath it, she caught something else, something darker that spoke of violence and danger. You're hurt, she said softly, her hand moving toward the cut without conscious thought. Mateo caught her wrist gently before she could touch him, his fingers warm against her cool skin. It's nothing. Healed already. He didn't let go of her wrist, his thumb brushing over her pulse point. You've lost weight. Hard to eat when you're worried, Elena admitted. You were worried about me? Something flickered in Mateo's dark eyes, pleasure mixed with concern. Of course I was. You disappeared with a cryptic warning, didn't call for 3 weeks except for brief texts, and your security team wouldn't tell me anything except that you were handling family business. Elena's voice rose slightly. What was I supposed to think? Mateo's grip on her wrist tightened fractionally. You were supposed to trust that I would come back, that I would keep you safe even when I couldn't be here personally, that you mattered enough for me to make sure nothing happened to you. But what about you? Elena's voice broke slightly. Who keeps you safe, Mateo? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. No one worries about me, Elena. No one has worried about me since Sophia died. Well, I do, Elena said fiercely. I worry about you. I spent 3 weeks imagining worst-case scenarios, wondering if you were hurt or worse. I know you're used to people being afraid of you, but I'm not afraid. I'm just... She stopped, searching for words. I care about you, Mateo. More than I probably should, given that we've known each other less than 2 months. Mateo stared at her, his dark eyes intense, searching her face as if trying to determine if she meant what she was saying. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his dangerous appearance. "I care about you too," he said roughly. "More than is wise, more than is safe for either of us. But I can't seem to stop myself." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could feel it. They were standing so close now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight imperfection in his otherwise perfect appearance that made him more human, more real. "What are we doing, Matteo?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted. "All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel something other than rage and emptiness. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me want to deserve you, even though I know I never will." "That's not true," Elena protested, but Matteo shook his head. "It is true. I'm not a good man, Elena. The things I've done, the things I'm capable of. You don't want to know. You shouldn't know." His jaw clenched. "But I'm too selfish to walk away from you, too desperate for what you give me to do the right thing and let you go." "Then don't," Elena said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Don't let me go. Don't walk away. Whatever this is between us, I want to see where it goes, even if it's complicated, even if it's scary." Matteo's eyes darkened with an emotion Elena couldn't quite read. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, his touch reverent despite his strength. "You don't know what you're asking for. Then show me," Elena challenged. "Stop protecting me from the truth and just show me who you really are. All of it." For a long moment, Matteo seemed to be warring with himself. Then, abruptly, he stepped back, releasing her. Elena immediately felt the loss of his warmth, his presence, and had to resist the urge to close the distance between them again. "Not here," Matteo said finally. "Not at our daughter's grave. She deserves better than to have this conversation overshadowing her memory." He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "My driver will pick you up at 6 tonight. Wear something comfortable. I'm taking you somewhere." "Where?" Elena asked. "You wanted to see who I really am," Matteo replied, his expression unreadable. "Tonight you'll get your wish, but Elena—" He caught her gaze, holding it with his own. "Once you see there's no going back, you can't unknow what you'll learn. Are you sure you want this?" Elena thought about the past 2 months, the grief, the connection, the way Matteo had quietly dismantled the investigation threatening her career, the security detail she'd grown accustomed to, the texts that kept her anchored during her darkest moments. She thought about how she felt when he looked at her, when his voice dropped to that soft, protective tone, when he touched her with hands that were capable of violence, but had only ever been gentle with her. "I'm sure," she said firmly. Matteo nodded slowly, something like approval flickering in his eyes. "Then I'll see you tonight." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her. "Elena, thank you." "For what?" "For worrying about me, for caring, for seeing me as something more than what the world thinks I am." His voice was rough with emotion. "For being brave enough to want to know the truth." After he left, Elena stood at Isabella's grave for a long time, her mind spinning with anticipation and nervousness about the evening ahead. She was about to step fully into Matteo's world, to see beyond the carefully controlled facade he'd maintained during their meetings. Part of her was terrified, but a larger part, the part that had been drawn to him from that first moment at the cemetery, was ready. She just hoped she was strong enough to handle whatever truths he was about to reveal. The black sedan arrived at Elena's apartment precisely at 6 o'clock. The driver, a man she recognized from her security detail, opened the door for her without comment, and they drove through the city as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Elena had changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a simple black sweater, uncertain what somewhere meant in Matteo's world. They drove for nearly an hour, leaving the city behind and heading into rural New Jersey. Elena watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to farmland, then to dense forest. Finally, they turned onto a private road, marked only by a discreet gate that opened automatically as they approached. The house that emerged from the trees took Elena's breath away. It was a modern architectural masterpiece, all glass and steel and clean lines, that somehow managed to look both imposing and elegant. Lights glowed warmly from within, and she could see the interior was filled with art and expensive furniture that spoke of wealth beyond her comprehension. Matteo was waiting on the front steps as the car pulled up. He'd changed into dark jeans and a fitted black shirt. His sleeves still rolled up, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The dangerous edge was still there, but softened somehow in this private space. "Welcome," he said simply as she approached. "This is my home." Elena looked around at the sprawling property, the perfectly manicured grounds, the obvious security measures disguised as landscape features. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Come inside." Matteo gestured for her to enter ahead of him. "There's someone I want you to meet." Elena's heart skipped. She hadn't expected there to be anyone else here, had assumed this evening would be just the two of them. She followed Matteo through the grand entrance into a living room that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. All leather and dark wood, and carefully curated art pieces. Sitting on the couch was an elderly woman in her 70s, elegantly dressed with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and sharp eyes that immediately assessed Elena from head to toe. Despite her age, there was something formidable about her, a presence that commanded respect. "Nonna," Matteo said, his voice taking on a warmth Elena had never heard before. "This is Elena Brooks. Elena, this is my grandmother, Maria DeLuca." Maria stood with surprising grace and approached Elena, studying her face with an intensity that made Elena want to fidget. Then, unexpectedly, the older woman smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed her severe features. "The nurse," Maria said in accented English, "the one who held Isabella at the end, and the one who has been bringing my grandson back to life." She took Elena's hands in her own, squeezing them gently. "Thank you, Cara. For both." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Maria replied. "Your presence here says enough. Matteo has not brought anyone to this house since Sophia died. That he brings you now means you are important, very important." She glanced at her grandson with a knowing look, and I think perhaps more than he has admitted even to himself. "Nonna," Matteo said, a hint of warning in his voice, but Maria just laughed. "I am old, nipote. I say what I think. Now, I will leave you two alone. Dinner is ready in the dining room. I had Rosa prepare something special." She patted Elena's hand once more before turning to Matteo. "Be honest with her. She deserves the truth, all of it." After Maria left, Matteo gestured for Elena to follow him deeper into the house. They passed through rooms filled with evidence of his life, photos of Sophia looking radiant in a wedding dress, paintings that Elena recognized as original works by Italian masters, shelves lined with books in multiple languages. The dining room was more intimate than she expected, a table set for two near a wall of windows overlooking the darkening forest. Candles flickered, casting warm shadows, and the smell of Italian cooking filled the air. "Your grandmother lives with you?" Elena asked as Matteo pulled out her chair. "She moved in after Sophia died," Matteo explained, taking the seat across from her. "Said she wasn't going to let me destroy myself in grief. She was right. I probably would have without her keeping me anchored." He poured wine into both their glasses. "She's the matriarch of our family. Everyone respects Nonna, even the most dangerous men in my organization." "Your organization," Elena repeated slowly. "The Mafia." Matteo's expression didn't change. Yes, though we prefer to call it a family business. My great-grandfather came to America from Sicily in the 1920s with nothing but ambition and ruthlessness. He built an empire through methods that weren't always legal but were always effective. My grandfather expanded it. My father consolidated power. And now I maintain what they built, while trying to legitimize as much as possible. Elena absorbed this, sipping her wine to buy time to process. What does that mean exactly? Legitimize? It means I'm moving our assets into legal businesses, real estate, restaurants, import-export companies that actually import and export legal goods. But the foundation of our wealth came from gambling, loan sharking, protection rackets, and... He paused, watching her carefully. Other activities I won't detail unless you specifically ask. And the violence? Elena's voice was quiet, but steady. The threats? The way people look at you like they're afraid? Matteo leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes never leaving hers. I have killed people, Elena. Men who betrayed my family, who threatened those under my protection, who crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. I have ordered violence done in my name. I have made decisions that resulted in suffering. He didn't look away, didn't try to soften the truth. I won't apologize for those choices because they were made to protect my family, my people, my territory. That's who I am. That's what my life requires. Elena's hands trembled slightly around her wine glass. She should have been horrified, should have stood up and walked out. But instead, all she felt was a strange certainty that he was telling her the truth, not to scare her or push her away, but because she'd asked for honesty. The men who hurt you, she said slowly. The cut on your face, the 3 weeks away, that was... A challenge to my authority, Matteo confirmed. A rival family thought they could move into our territory while testing whether I'd gone soft after Sophia's death. I had to remind them why my family has held power for 4 generations. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. They sat in silence for a moment as the housekeeper Rosa brought out the first course, a beautiful caprese salad with tomatoes and mozzarella that looked like art on the plate. Elena stared at the food, her mind racing. Why tell me all this? She finally asked. Why bring me here? Introduce me to your grandmother. Show me your life. You could have kept me separate from this side of you. Because you deserve to make an informed choice, Matteo said simply. Because if this, he gestured between them, is going to be something real, something that matters, you need to know exactly who you're getting involved with. I won't lie to you, Elena. I won't hide the darkness in my world and then have you discover it later and feel betrayed. Elena met his gaze across the candlelit table. Are you trying to scare me away? Part of me is, Matteo admitted. The part that knows you deserve better than a life complicated by what I am. But the selfish part, the part that needs you, is hoping you'll be brave enough to stay anyway. Elena took a bite of the caprese, buying time to organize her thoughts. The food was incredible, fresh and flavorful in a way that suggested Rosa was a master chef. Around them, the house was quiet, except for the soft sound of classical music playing from hidden speakers. I work in neonatal intensive care, Elena said finally. I hold babies who are fighting for their lives, whose bodies are so fragile that a wrong touch could hurt them. I make decisions every day that determine whether they live or die. I've watched parents pray over incubators, seen families destroyed when we can't save their children. My job, my life, has never been simple or safe or uncomplicated. She set down her fork and looked at Matteo directly. Yes, your world is different, more dangerous in different ways. But I'm not some naive girl who needs protection from hard truths. I've seen death, Matteo. I've held it in my hands. I know that life is complicated and that good people sometimes make hard choices, and that the world isn't divided neatly into heroes and villains. So, what are you saying? Mateo's voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the hope he was trying to hide. I'm saying that I'm not running, Elena replied. I'm saying that yes, this scares me. Your life, your power, the violence that's part of your world, it all scares me. But you know what scares me more? The idea of walking away from someone who understands my grief, who sees me as something worth protecting, who makes me feel less alone than I've felt in years. Mateo's expression shifted, relief and something deeper flooding across his features. He reached across the table, his hand extended palm up. An invitation. Elena placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything he'd just told her about his capacity for violence. You're sure? He asked quietly. Because once you're part of my life, truly part of it, I won't be able to let you go easily. My world doesn't do casual, Elena. When we care about someone, we protect them completely, possessively, sometimes obsessively. I'm sure, Elena said, and meant it. They ate dinner together, the conversation gradually shifting to lighter topics. Mateo told her about growing up in this world, the strange dichotomy of attending boarding school with the children of politicians and CEOs, while knowing his family's wealth came from illegal enterprises. He spoke of his grandmother's influence, how she'd taught him that power came with responsibility, that protecting the weak was as important as destroying enemies. Elena shared stories from nursing school, the friends she'd made and lost touch with as their lives diverged, the strange satisfaction that came from saving a life that everyone else had given up on. She talked about her mother's death, how it had driven her to work harder, to be better, to make sure her mother's sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. After dinner, Mateo gave her a tour of the house. He showed her the library filled with first editions, the home gym where he clearly spent considerable time maintaining his impressive physique, the office where he conducted business that she suspected included both legal and illegal dealings. Finally, he led her to a room that made her breath catch. It was a nursery, perfectly preserved, untouched, with a crib that had never been used, and toys still in their packages. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and there were photos on the dresser. Sophia, pregnant and glowing, Mateo's hand on her belly, both of them looking so happy it hurt to see. I haven't been able to change it, Mateo admitted quietly, standing in the doorway as if entering the room would be too painful. Sophia spent months planning every detail. She had such specific ideas about what our daughter's first room should look like. His voice roughened. It's been 6 months, and I still can't bring myself to pack it away. Elena walked into the room, her fingers trailing over the unused crib, the soft blankets, the stuffed animals still bearing tags. You don't have to, she said gently. There's no timeline for grief, Mateo. You keep this room as long as you need to. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something raw and vulnerable and grateful all at once. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms with a fierce urgency that took her breath away. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. Thank you for understanding, for not telling me to move on, or that it's time to let go, or any of the other useless things people say when they're uncomfortable with grief. Elena wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him as tightly as he held her. They stood like that in the nursery for a long time, 2 people who'd lost so much finding comfort in each other's presence. When they finally pulled apart, Mateo's eyes were slightly red, though no tears had fallen. Stay, he said suddenly. Tonight, stay here. Not... He stopped, clarifying quickly. I have several guest rooms. Stay the night. Let me make you breakfast in the morning. Let me have a little more time with you before the real world intrudes again. Elena knew she should probably say no. should maintain some boundaries, should go slow. But being here, in Mateo's home, seeing the life he'd built, and the grief he carried, and the man beneath the dangerous exterior, she didn't want to leave yet. Okay, she agreed. I'll stay. Relief flooded Mateo's features. Good, that's good. He seemed almost nervous, this man who commanded fear from hardened criminals. Come on, I'll show you to your room. The guest room was elegant and comfortable, with an attached bathroom and a view of the forest. Mateo provided her with new toiletries and a t-shirt to sleep in. One of his, she realized, which swallowed her smaller frame completely. If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall, Mateo said from the doorway. Don't hesitate to come find me. After he left, Elena got ready for bed, her mind reeling from everything she'd learned and experienced that evening. She was in Matteo De Luca's home, wearing his shirt, having just been told the truth about his violent world. And somehow, instead of feeling terrified or repulsed, she felt safe, connected, like she'd finally found somewhere she belonged. She was almost asleep when her phone buzzed with a text. From Matteo, despite him being just down the hall. Thank you for staying, for not running, for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. Sleep well, Elena. She typed back. You deserve more than you think, and I'm glad I'm here. Good night, Matteo. That night, Elena slept better than she had in months, surrounded by Matteo's scent and the knowledge that he was close by. And down the hall, Matteo lay awake long into the night, thinking about the woman sleeping in his guest room, and marveling at how she'd managed to slip past his defenses and become someone he couldn't imagine his life without. Morning came with weak November sunshine filtering through the windows. Elena woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Matteo's house, Matteo's guest room, Matteo's world that she'd agreed to be part of. She showered and dressed in yesterday's clothes, then followed the smell of coffee downstairs. The kitchen was massive and modern, and Matteo stood at the stove wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that showed off his muscular build. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it multiple times, and he looked impossibly domestic, despite the dangerous artwork visible on his arms. Good morning, he said, turning to smile at her. The expression transformed his usually hard features, making him look younger, more approachable. I hope you're hungry. Nonna taught me to cook, and I'm making her special frittata. Elena slid onto a stool at the kitchen island, accepting the coffee he poured for her. You cook? Italian men cook, Matteo corrected with amusement. It's practically a requirement in my family. Nonna says any man who can't feed himself and his family properly is useless. He plated the frittata with practiced efficiency, adding fresh bread and fruit. Besides, cooking relaxes me, helps me think. They ate together as morning light filled the kitchen, the conversation easy and comfortable. Matteo told her about his plans for the day, legitimate business meetings, he assured her, and asked about her upcoming work schedule. It felt strangely normal, like they were any couple having breakfast together rather than a mafia boss and a nurse navigating an improbable relationship. I need to tell you something, Matteo said as they finished eating. His expression had turned serious, the dangerous edge creeping back into his demeanor. The men who challenged my authority, the reason I was gone for 3 weeks, they didn't just target me. They also made inquiries about you. Elena's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. What? They wanted to know who you were, why you mattered to me, whether you could be used as leverage. Matteo's voice was hard, controlled rage simmering beneath the surface. That's why the security detail has been so tight. That's why I needed to handle things personally. I had to make absolutely certain that everyone understood you are under my protection, that touching you means war with my entire family. Elena set down her cup, her hands shaking slightly. Are they still a threat? No. Matteo's response was flat, Final. They're not a threat to anyone anymore. Elena absorbed the implication of those words. She should have felt horrified, should have been repulsed by the violence he was admitting to. Instead, all she felt was a strange gratitude that he'd protected her so completely. "Will there be others?" she asked quietly. "Other people who might see me as a weakness, a way to hurt you?" "Possibly," Matteo admitted. He moved around the island to stand beside her, his hand cupping her face gently. "That's the reality of my world, Elena. There will always be people looking for weaknesses to exploit. But I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you. My entire organization is committed to your safety now. Your family." "Family," Elena repeated softly. "I barely know your world, Matteo. I don't know the rules, the expectations, how to—" "You don't need to know any of that," Matteo interrupted firmly. "You just need to be yourself. That's what I want, who you are, not some version of you that's been molded to fit my world. If you want to learn more, I'll teach you. If you prefer to maintain distance from the darker aspects, I'll respect that. This relationship happens on your terms, Elena. Always." Elena looked up at him, at the intensity in his dark eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice. This man who commanded fear from others was offering her complete control over how their relationship developed. It was a gift she hadn't expected, a vulnerability he was showing her that she suspected few people ever saw. "I want to know," she decided. "Not everything, maybe. Not the details that would keep me up at night. But I want to understand your world enough to know what you're dealing with, what pressures you're under. I don't want to be some fragile thing you have to protect from reality." Matteo's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You're the strongest person I know," he said quietly. "The fact that you're here, that you stayed after learning the truth, that takes more courage than anything I've ever done." They were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Matteo's entire demeanor shifted instantly, his body tensing, his expression hardening into the mask of control Elena had seen that first day at the cemetery. Then Maria's voice called out, "Matteo? Is Elena still here? I brought breakfast pastries." Matteo relaxed again, a small smile tugging at his lips. "In the kitchen, Nonna." Maria bustled in carrying bags from what was obviously an expensive Italian bakery. She took one look at Elena and Matteo standing close together, his hand still on her face, and her eyes lit up with undisguised pleasure. "Good," she said firmly, setting down the bags. "I was worried you might have scared her away with your intensity, Nipote. Elena, Cara, you stayed. Does this mean you're giving my stubborn grandson a chance?" Elena found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "I'm giving him a chance." "Excellent." Maria began unpacking pastries, continuing to talk without pause. "He needs someone like you. Someone who sees past the reputation to the man underneath. Someone who makes him smile again. Yes, Matteo. I've noticed you smiling more these past weeks. Don't think I haven't." Matteo looked vaguely embarrassed, which Elena found endearing. This formidable man who struck fear into criminals was being gently scolded by his grandmother, and he was taking it with remarkable patience. They spent the next hour together, Maria telling stories from Matteo's childhood that made him simultaneously nostalgic and mortified. Elena learned about the boy who'd been scared of thunderstorms until his grandfather took him out in one to prove there was nothing to fear. About the teenager who'd brought home a stray dog and nursed it back to health. About the young man who'd fallen in love with Sophia at first sight and pursued her with determined patience until she agreed to date him. "He's a good man," Maria said seriously, her hand covering Elena's. "A dangerous man, yes. A powerful man with enemies. But good here." She tapped her chest over her heart. "He protects those he loves with everything he has. He's loyal, passionate, devoted. And since Sophia died, I worried he would close himself off forever. But you You opened something in him again. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I care about him very much. I know, Maria said gently. I can see it in how you look at him. Just as I can see how he looks at you, like you're something precious he's afraid to break, but can't bear to let go of. Later, after Maria left, and Elena reluctantly admitted she needed to go home and prepare for her shift the next day, Matteo walked her to the car. The driver waited discreetly, giving them space to say goodbye. When can I see you again? Matteo asked, his hand clasping hers tightly. Tuesday morning? Elena suggested. At the cemetery? Tuesday morning, Matteo agreed. And, Elena... He hesitated, seeming to struggle with words. What we have, what we're building, it's important to me, more important than I know how to express. Elena rose on her toes and kissed his cheek gently, feeling his sharp intake of breath at the gesture. It's important to me, too. The drive back to her apartment gave Elena time to process everything. Her life had changed so dramatically in just 2 months. She'd gone from a grieving, isolated nurse to someone connected to one of the most powerful men in New Jersey's underworld. She'd learned truths about violence and protection, and the thin line between good and evil. And she'd found something she hadn't expected. The possibility of love after loss, of connection after isolation, of a future that included someone who understood her darkest moments. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Tuesday and Friday mornings remained their sacred time at the cemetery, but now they also spent evenings together. Quiet dinners at Matteo's house, walks through the forest surrounding his property, long conversations about everything and nothing. Matteo introduced her to more of his world gradually, carefully, always watching to make sure she wasn't overwhelmed. Elena met other members of his family, cousins who ran legitimate businesses, associates who treated her with careful respect, and Anthony Russo's full security team, who became familiar faces in her daily life. She learned to recognize the signs when Matteo had dealt with violence, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw would clench, the need to see her that evening as if her presence cleansed him of darkness. She didn't ask about the details. She didn't want to know exactly what he did to maintain his power. But she began to understand the weight he carried, the responsibility of protecting hundreds of people who depended on his family's organization for their livelihood. She saw how he navigated between ruthlessness and compassion, how he tried to minimize violence while knowing it was sometimes necessary. At work, Elena threw herself into caring for her tiny patients with renewed dedication. Saving lives felt even more important now that she'd seen how easily death could come, how fragile the line was between breathing and silence. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, the way she seemed more grounded, less haunted. Some attributed it to time healing her grief over Isabella. Only Elena knew the truth, that she was healing because someone understood her pain, because she'd found connection in the last place she'd expected. One evening in mid-December, 3 months after that first meeting at Isabella's grave, Matteo took Elena back to the cemetery at sunset. They stood together at the small white headstone, their breath visible in the cold air. I want to tell you something, Matteo said, his arm around Elena's shoulders. I've been coming here every week for 6 months, and every week it hurt more. The grief felt like it was consuming me, like I was drowning in it with no way to reach the surface. He turned to look at Elena, his dark eyes soft in the fading light. But then you appeared, and slowly, week by week, the drowning feeling lessened. I'm still grieving. I think I always will be. But now there's something else too. Hope. Purpose. A reason to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You gave me the same thing, she whispered. I was so lost after Isabella died, so convinced I'd failed her. But you helped me understand that I did what I could, that holding her in her final moments mattered, that sometimes love means being present even when you can't fix things. Matteo pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. She brought us together, you know. Our daughter. If she'd lived, we never would have met. You wouldn't have been at her grave. I wouldn't have found you there. As much as I wish she'd survived, as much as I'd give anything to have her here. I can't help but think there's some kind of meaning in how we found each other. Elena turned in his arms, looking up at him. I think Isabella is at peace now, she said softly. I think she knows her father found someone who makes him want to live again. And I think... Her voice caught with emotion. I think she'd want us to be happy, to build something good from all this grief. Matteo cupped Elena's face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I love you, he said, the words rough but certain. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why I shouldn't say it yet. But I love you, Elena Brooks. You've become the most important person in my life, and I need you to know that. Elena's heart felt like it might burst. I love you too, she replied, her voice breaking. I love you, Matteo De Luca. All of you. The dangerous parts, and the gentle parts, and everything in between. They kissed for the first time there at Isabella's grave, a gentle meeting of lips that felt like a promise, like a beginning, like redemption. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying quietly, tears of grief and joy mixed together. Thank you, Matteo whispered against her forehead, for giving me a reason to hope again. Thank you, Elena replied, for teaching me that love can exist even in the darkest places. They stood together as the sun set completely, the cemetery falling into gentle darkness. Around them, the world continued, indifferent to their pain, unaware of their healing, unconcerned with their unlikely love. But for Matteo and Elena, standing at the grave of the baby who'd brought them together, nothing else mattered. They'd found each other in the aftermath of tragedy, had built connection from shared grief, and had discovered that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected places. As they finally turned to leave, Matteo placed one last kiss on the cold marble of Isabella's headstone. Rest peacefully, little one, he murmured. Your father is going to be okay now. And I think maybe that's what you wanted all along. Elena added her own whispered goodbye, then took Matteo's hand. Together they walked away from the cemetery toward a future neither could have imagined months ago, a future built on truth and trust, and the understanding that love, when it finally comes, doesn't erase the past, but makes it possible to face the future. The Mafia boss and the nurse, connected by a tiny life that lasted mere minutes, had found redemption in each other. And in the quiet darkness of that small New Jersey cemetery, if one listened closely enough, it was almost possible to hear the sound of a baby's final peaceful breath. Not a sound of ending, but of blessing.